Hello and a warm welcome back to this week's episode of the Face Yoga Expert podcast. And just like last week, we are talking food and nutrition, but this week a little bit different because we are delving into the world of hormones and specifically our menstrual cycle and perimenopause. And my guest is Kate Morton. And Kate Morton has over 7 years of experience as a registered dietitian and a master's degree in human clinical nutrition. And she is very much dedicated to menstrual health and anti-diet culture education. She also founded Funk It Wellness with a mission to empower all menstruators, providing them with the autonomy over their bodies and helping them make peace with food and their cycles. And before we get into this week's episode, I want to tell you about an amazing course bundle that I now have for you. So you can get this just by going to my website, faceyogaexpert.com, click on courses. If you go to the personal courses on there, you'll see my 4 key personal courses. So personal courses are face yoga courses for your own use. So rather than the professional courses, which are more for teacher training and sharing with other people. And I have now for you the ultimate course package. So you get all 4 of my personal courses. So that's 7-day natural facelift, 21-day face yoga, the face yoga workshop bundle, and the face yoga retreat bundle. So this is perfect if you want the ultimate face yoga package. So it's really designed to rejuvenate your face, uplift your mind, and invigorate your body. And it's all at unbelievable value of £161. So that's for 4 courses packed full of face yoga and so much more. Over 22 hours in there, all video-based learning. You have accompanying PDFs with key points from each course. You have lifetime access to all of these courses. And it really gives you the ultimate natural facelift. So head to either the link in the show notes or just go across to my website, faceyogaexpert.com, and click on courses. So let's get into this week's episode with the lovely Kate Morton. Kate, a very warm welcome to the Face Yoga Expert podcast. How are you doing today?
It's a great day here. It's like starting to warm up. We're getting into summer. So, just all the nice springtime things.
That's so lovely. Exactly the same here in the UK. We've had a really cold, rainy spring, but today it feels like the warmth is coming. So I'm so excited to have sunshine this week. It's going to be amazing. Really lovely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's kind of cloudy here, but it's already super hot because I'm in Texas. And so I'm like, I'm thankful for the clouds, but just like a nice springtime.
Amazing. And there's so much I want to delve into today. I love starting at the beginning, and I'd really love to know a little bit about your journey into food, nutrition, becoming a dietitian, but also pairing that a little bit about your hormonal journey and actually how this inspired a lot of what you do today.
Yeah, so I always loved food, always loved baking, cooking, nutrition. I was actually an art major when I first went to university, but I quickly realized that's not the path I wanted to take. And I got into nutrition and I just absolutely fell in love. My grandma's a dietitian, so I feel like I've always been very exposed to the profession. And I was initially a pediatric pulmonary dietitian. So I worked with a lot of little kids and their parents and did a lot of education there. But after I got off birth control, I realized how much I wasn't taught about hormones, even after going to 4 years of undergraduate and a whole year and a half of my master's program. And so that's kind of been my mission ever since then, is just to share all the information I've learned about not just nutrition, but exercise and understanding our menstrual cycles. So I didn't expect to be a hormone dietitian, but here we are.
I love that. It's amazing. And sometimes we need to go through those difficult times and those personal challenges and those sort of ups and downs in order to find our true purpose. And it sounds like you absolutely have with that. And I'm really intrigued to know actually the type of clients you mostly work with and what the biggest challenges they have are.
Yeah, so I would say there's about 3 buckets of people that I work with the most often, both in my private practice and with Funk It, which is our seed cycling company. And the first one is PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is a condition that a lot of people don't have a lot of education on, but it's fairly common. It's documented that 1 in 10 women or people with periods have PCOS. Doctors think it's closer to 1 in 5 just because a lot of people aren't diagnosed. And so that is a lot of people. And so that's the majority of my clients. Some clients come to me with irregular cycles and we end up finding out they have PCOS. The other would be fertility, trying to get pregnant and increasing ovulation and regular cycles. And I would say the third category is people who just have very unpleasant cycles and their hormones they can just feel something's off and they're wanting more information and they want to dive into what could be going on. Because I work with a test called Dutch testing. It's a dried urine hormone test. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've used it myself, actually. It's fantastic.
Amazing. So that's like my third person who would come see me. It's just someone who's like, I just want to have a deeper understanding of my cycle. And I feel like something's off, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Dutch testing is fantastic. I used it probably year and a half, 2 years ago. And finally, at then the age of 40, I was diagnosed with PMDD. So I've always suffered from quite extreme PMS. And actually, it's something which I've definitely masked over the years. Most people would have absolutely no clue that I would suffer so badly in that week leading up to my period. And I realized that I'd been suffering since my period started when I was 14. And actually, it was at the age of 40 that the symptoms started getting a little bit stronger. Perhaps perimenopause was starting to kick in. And again, nobody would really notice. I'm very capable. I'm running a business. I've got 2 little girls. But actually, inside, that instant shift. For me, it's day 20. It's like I wake up on day 20 and feel like a completely different person and quite extreme. And then my period comes on day 27. It's like, oh, back to Danielle again, back to how I was. So actually doing that Dutch test for me was fantastic because it really let me understand things like I was really estrogen dominant in that week leading up to my period. So things like seed cycling have been great. There's a supplement called DIM, which I've been taking, which has been really, really helpful, ashwagandha. And actually, the biggest thing for me has been lowering stress levels because actually what I realize is when my stress levels lower, I can have much more extreme, lower, I can have much less symptoms. And when they're higher, those symptoms are much stronger. And actually, I'm thankful to say, particularly over the last sort of 3 to 6 months, my symptoms have massively reduced. So yes, I understand the Dutch test completely. It's so great. It's a bit of a faff because you do have to every morning you have to pee on the stick and then you have to remember it, but really, really good. And I'm really interested to know actually when people do the tests that you recommend, what do you then recommend to them? So is it diet? Is it supplements? Is it exercise? Maybe you could talk us through that.
Yeah. Well, one, I'm so glad that you had such a good experience with the Dutch test. I had a really similar experience. So it's one of those things I'm just like, is a little pricey and it's a little bit of a pain, but if you can make the budget and the time for it, it's so insightful. And PMDD is another thing that's very common that we don't talk about. And I think women are really good at, quote unquote, sucking it up and being productive. And you would never know, just like you said. And so just thank you for sharing that because I feel like it's really helpful for people to hear that. But when it comes to the Dutch test, it is so interesting to me because everyone's Dutch test is so different. And this is what it's so crazy. I always knew that bio-individual practitioner support and medical support was important. But when I started doing GI map testing and Dutch testing, which GI map testing is looking at the entire gut microbiome, looking for any kind of parasites, all of that, I had no idea. I have never seen a GI map that is the same. I have never seen a Dutch test that is the same. There's always patterns. So that's like step one is just now we're going to be able to have a bio-individual approach. And so then we kind of look at the different categories. So the most common thing I do see is estrogen dominance. And so we're really getting in there, just like you were saying, people hate this advice, but the stress reduction is genuinely like the most important thing.
Completely is. And for me, that I've been taking all the supplements for a couple of years, doing all the foods, all the rest of things. But as soon as I reduced actually for me, it was reducing a lot of my workload. It was having less screen time because I was doing all the things anyway. I do yoga every day. I do pretty much every self-care thing there is, but I was still getting symptoms. But actually reducing that, for me, that feeling of overwhelm and having too much on my plate, taking a little bit off my plate, so to speak, a little bit less and just having a little bit more free time, reduce my symptoms so quickly.
It's just crazy. And so when I'm looking at a Dutch test, I approach every client with their individual results, but it's the same framework. So we look at diet 100%. Obviously, I'm a dietitian. That's where we're going to spend a lot of time. We look at supplementation if necessary. And my approach to supplementation is let's go food first. It's why I love things like seed cycling and a raw carrot salad and things that can help remove and support estrogen. So we look at that nutrition aspect. We look at supplementation if we need to, especially if we're looking if we have some. So when it comes to testing, when I'm doing my intake appointment with a client, I look at what are our bowel movements like? What are we seeing on a daily basis? Because if constipation is the number one thing we're struggling with, then we can't start with a Dutch test. We actually have to start with a GI map test. So that's the first thing, is like looking at that. And then if we're going into looking at gut health, we're looking at that supplementation aspect. If there's a gut infection, we always start with supplementation. Exercise. This is a really interesting piece of the puzzle that I feel like a lot of people just kind of skip over. A lot of us are over exercising or doing the wrong exercises. And especially if I'm seeing really high cortisol on this Dutch test coming back, we're going to be stripping it back. We're going to be focusing on low intensity. And then the next piece is mindfulness. And that's where that stress relief comes in. And mindfulness is something that is so underrated, but we have so much research to show it directly helps with hormones. I actually think the mindfulness component, I'm speaking for myself and clients, is the hardest because I'm the same as you. I'm running a business. I've got my private clients. I love to be busy. I'm definitely addicted to cortisol and the being busy, and society makes you feel important and good when you're being productive, but it's actually like counterintuitive what our body and our hormones want. That was a really long, little rant, but that's kind of the total approach. We look at everything from a 360 holistic view. And usually each appointment, we're just taking one thing from each category to focus on. I used to overload my clients and be like, okay, here's all these meal advice. Here's all this exercise advice. Here's all these mindfulness tips. And I realized it's actually not helpful. It's more overwhelming. So we just take one thing at a time, work together, usually about 6 months to a year. And then that's when we can I send them on their way, and they've usually got it by then on their own.
I love that. And simplifying it is so important. And in fact, I'd love to delve into perhaps 5 key foods that you would recommend that would really help support our menstrual cycle. I know you mentioned seed cycling, so that might be one of them. And maybe we'll break down the seed cycling in a minute and talk a bit more about that. And you mentioned the raw carrot salad as well. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that and perhaps suggest 3 other foods that you think would support most women in their menstrual cycle.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I just did a little mashup post on this because I do think there's some foods that are just generally supportive. And I'm all about abundance, addition. This doesn't mean you need to subtract things you're eating. This is just add these yummy foods in. One is leafy greens. I feel like leafy greens are the most underrated vegetable because they're good for pretty much every phase of your menstrual cycle. They actually contain a lot of amazing nutrients like vitamin K, magnesium, calcium. Some of them contain DIM. It's all of these amazing things are in leafy greens. So leafy greens, I recommend, which is kale, spinach. The darker the green, the better. Collard greens, turnip greens. The darker the pigment of the green, the more nutrition it has. So that's kind of what I look for. Leafy green is going to support you. Also, fiber. Fiber is one of the most underrated tools for supporting if you feel like you have high estrogen, which those symptoms are going to be tender breasts, mood swings, a lot of bloating, especially around ovulation. You might struggle with constipation and then painful, heavy periods. So we love a leafy green. The next thing that I think is really important, and this isn't a specific food, but more of a category, protein. And you can get this in any way. So if you eat meat, you can get it through meat, get it through plants, you can get it through a mixture of both. But getting enough protein and starting your day with protein is going to change your life. Like I used to be, wake up, have like a piece of fruit and then like run on my way, chug coffee on an empty stomach, go do a workout. All of those things are one, cause really unstable blood sugar throughout the entire day, which causes cortisol to spike. But then two, cortisol, your stress hormone, is the highest in the morning. When it's naturally waking you up, it should be the highest. So if we're not feeding our body with protein and then we're having caffeine on an empty stomach, we're having that cortisol continue to rise throughout the day. And this can cause a lot of unpleasant side effects, anxiety, stress. Eventually, it can lead to puffiness, bloating, lack of digestion. So protein in the morning. And then, of course, I love seed cycling, and we can break that down. That's technically 4 foods, but we'll just count it as one. So you track your menstrual cycle, and from the first day of your period until you ovulate or midway through your cycle, you're having 1 tablespoon of organic flax seeds and 1 tablespoon of organic pumpkin seeds. That is really supportive for estrogen, which is the main hormone of that phase. It's packed with magnesium, zinc, phytoestrogens, omega-3 fatty acids, all of those things, and fiber. We cannot forget the prebiotic fiber that seeds have. All of those things are very supportive for the first half of your menstrual cycle. After you ovulate till your next period, 1 tablespoon of organic sesame, 1 tablespoon of organic sunflower seeds. Vitamin E, B6. Combined, those are clinically proven PMS busters. They help with breast tenderness, period pain, mood swings. We've got calcium, which is really important for mood and period pain. We've still got some omega-3 fatty acids to help with inflammation. And we've got a little bit of selenium to help with thyroid support. So seed cycling is a very simple practice that helps you honor your menstrual cycle, but then also sync your nutrition with it. And then raw carrot salad, which is also like a very underrated tool. You just wash your carrot really good. And I use a peeler because I like to have like the little ribbons of carrots. I do a little bit of olive oil and a little bit of salt. And I eat that every day because estrogen dominance is something I struggle with. Again, we're coming in with that prebiotic fiber, which helps to get rid of excess estrogen. And so if you're listening to this, you're like, wow, I have painful periods, breast tenderness. I'm struggling with my mood around the week before my period. I'm having a lot of clotting. One, of course, do a Dutch test so that we can see, test, not guess, but you can also incorporate some of those foods in to really help. And then the third is not a food. It's a beverage, but water. Water is just something that I struggle to drink water. It's hard, but your uterus is a muscle and we have to be hydrated for everything to progress. You can add electrolytes for a little bonus with some magnesium. That would be amazing.
That's so great. I love all of those tips. So, so helpful. And how would that work for women that are on the birth control pill or that are on the coil? How would they do things like seed cycling or have an understanding of where their cycle is, particularly if they're on birth control, which is pretty much stopping periods altogether, apart from perhaps like breakthrough bleeds?
Yeah, if you're on birth control, seed cycling is probably not going to be as effective because you're not going through that cycle. It does support gut health, which we do see a disruption in gut health when on birth control. But some tips if you're on birth control, IUD we'll talk about a little separately because it'll depend which one you're on, because you still can seed cycle if you have like the copper IUD because you are still ovulating. But if you're on birth control, some things I always tell people to focus on. Let's focus on getting some good B vitamins in our diet. B vitamins can be depleted by the birth control pill, and they're very important for a lot of hormonal reactions. And especially whenever you get off of it, going back to that normal ovulation cycle, all your B vitamins are going to be really important, but specifically B6, B12, and folate. Then another one's magnesium. So many people are deficient in magnesium. And magnesium has a lot to do with mood and sleep. It also has to do with over 500 reactions in our body. It's very important. So leafy greens, nuts and seeds do contain a lot of magnesium, dark chocolate, all great sources. And then vitamin E. So that's like in sunflower seeds. So I guess seed cycling could be actually really beneficial now that I'm like saying all these things.
Yeah. But I guess they don't need to necessarily do it at different times of the month. They could have like a mixed seed and maybe like put it in the morning on like oatmeal or in a smoothie or something like that. So, because you can buy really good organic seed mixes. So I'm guessing that's helpful for any woman at any stage of their cycle.
Yeah. And so if you're on birth control, like just getting nuts and seeds in and really focusing on getting like lots of good prebiotic fiber from fruits and veggies is what I would recommend. And then when you're ready to come off, I would seed cycle with the moon. So new moon to full moon, you're going to have your pumpkin and flax blend, full moon to new moon.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have your sesame and sunflower blend. I had to think about that. That will just help you get in the habit. And then you'll follow your natural cycle when you get off. If you're on a hormonal IUD, all that applies. But if you're on the copper IUD, you are still most likely ovulating, and because there's no hormones in the copper IUD. So you can seed cycle as normal because you still probably will experience a lot of those PMS symptoms if you do have any kind of hormonal imbalance.
Absolutely. Such good tips for everyone. And women that are going into perimenopause, so they still got that menstrual cycle, but actually perhaps some symptoms are getting stronger, or perhaps there's slightly more irregular cycle. Are there any particular foods that they can bring in? Or I should say we, because I imagine that I'm also in perimenopause now. And actually on that note, it's difficult to tell even with a Dutch test, because I had a really good expert sort of look through when I had mine when I turned 40. And actually she said, we can't even, with all this information, we can't definitely tell that you're in perimenopause because I still have really regular cycles. And now I know by reducing stress, my PMDD symptoms have reduced massively. So it's difficult to tell, but let's presume, if women are between sort of 40 and 50, then they may be suffering some perimenopause symptoms.
Yeah. And, perimenopause is this thing that I feel like we don't talk about enough. And it's something I'm very passionate. I'm not in perimenopause yet. I just turned 30, but it is something I'm so passionate about because watching my friends go through this and my mom go through it, 10 years ago, it was just, there's no information and it can feel very isolating. So if you are in perimenopause, if you still have a regular menstrual cycle, seed cycling is going to give you a lot of benefit. Something else I recommend for perimenopause is having vitamin D and vitamin B12 levels checked. These are two things that are very, very important throughout the entire life cycle. But we do, with a lot of clients I do tend to see a lot of them having deficiencies in vitamin D and vitamin B12. So I always check those because energy, mood, and sleep disruption are three really common symptoms of perimenopause. And sometimes when we address vitamin D and B12, we can really improve those symptoms pretty quickly and get some immediate relief. The other thing I think is really important to focus on is omega-3 fatty acids. So you can get those from nuts and seeds. You can also get them from fatty fish. That is going to be very important for supporting inflammation as we go into perimenopause. And then phytoestrogen-rich foods like flax seeds, edamame, soy. There's a lot of misconception around soy. So the studies that were done on soy that showed that it indicated like more risk of breast cancer actually have been proven invalid. Like invalid's not the right word, but they did not conduct research to a standard. It was really, they wanted an outcome. They studied it to get the outcome. I don't know how else to say that more eloquently, but the research was a little rigged. And so if you look at the latest research, actually soy can be super beneficial in perimenopause and menopause, and that can really help with dryness and hot flashes. So dryness is not just vaginal dryness. It can be eyes, mouth. It can be any part of the body that has a mucosal membrane can dry out. This causes people a lot of distress. So omega-3 fatty acids and phytoestrogens can be super helpful for that. And then the thing we see for perimenopause as far as exercise, building as much muscle and maintaining lean body mass. So strength training, flow-based yogas, think Pilates, reformer Pilates, that really does seem to help with bone density and muscle mass as we head into menopause. Because once we head into menopause, we do see we lose muscle and bone mass a lot quicker than we do once estrogen is gone. So that's like a little bit of a rant, but I'm very passionate that there is a lot in perimenopause we can do to support, and of course, lowering stress, like you mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, it's a very good rant, and I agree with all of it. And actually, for me, doing regular blood tests have been really, really helpful as well. And as I've managed to increase, well, actually, my iron levels, now my vitamin D is very optimum, my magnesium is very optimum. Luckily, my B12 has always been, all my B vitamins have always been really, really good. But actually, again, going back a couple of years ago, my D was lower than it should be, my magnesium was lower than it should be, and my iron was. So getting all that up, I'm sure has made a massive difference as well. But it's also just keeping on top of it. You know, this is the thing. And I feel like so many women, particularly my age in their 40s, are suffering. And sometimes it can be as simple as taking a little vitamin D spray. You know, I just literally use a spray, and that's got my vitamin levels up from suboptimal to actually above the recommended levels. So it's gone, you know, completely the other way with that one thing. So actually getting blood test results. And what I know is very different in the UK compared with the US when it comes to healthcare and doctors, but actually often asking for a printout of your bloods as well, like actually being able to have a look yourself. Because in my experience, what has often happened is a GP, we're very lucky because we have the NHS, we have free healthcare here. However, you know, there is often overcrowding, busyness, all the rest of it. So doctors often cannot take the time to really delve deep into specific vitamins, specific minerals, and exactly getting it up to optimum. So for me, getting a printout of everything and then looking myself and actually going, hang on a minute, that probably, yes, it's okay-ish, but it's probably lower than it should be to help support my lifestyle, to support my hormones and support the age that I am. So we can empower ourselves by simply getting printouts and, you know, even just asking advice from a nutritionist, a dietitian, a functional medicine, just asking them, even if it's just booking a half an hour session with them and asking them just to look through your blood test results and actually say, okay, so some of those things could do with a little bit of extra help. So, you know, never be afraid to ask is definitely my advice.
I think that's amazing advice. And I love having a printout or getting them to send you a PDF because there are like, I go to an amazing functional medicine doctor and I'll just share with you guys. And I went back and looked and my high cholesterol runs in my family. And even though I'm very healthy and exercise, one really common misconception is most of our cholesterol is hereditary. So keeping an eye on it is very important. And that was another tip I wanted to give for perimenopause. Cardiovascular health can change very quickly in perimenopause as estrogen declines. So getting those printouts and looking, my LDL, which is your bad cholesterol, was 1 point high, which is not a big deal. And they didn't take time to go through it with me. But I know I have a family history of high cholesterol. So having that printout, I was able to look at it and say, okay, let me do some research. And I started taking berberine because it's a natural support for cholesterol. Went back, my levels were great. So having that printout, you can catch something much earlier.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And is there anything else that you do personally on a daily basis? Any sort of self-care or wellness or exercise hacks that you use to help support your busy lifestyle, but also just to support your hormones as well?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is probably the one that nobody wants to hear because I love coffee. It's like my favorite thing in the world. But I have Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid autoimmune disease, and I have celiac. So I just have a lot of inflammation in my body from those autoimmune diseases. And so I follow an anti-inflammatory diet protocol. So I switched to matcha from coffee, and it was really hard in the beginning, but I feel so much better. It's just been a few weeks, but I did just want to say that in case anyone's listening and they have been noticing maybe coffee doesn't feel good in their body, but they really like their ritual. After a few weeks, I'm really into my matcha ritual and I'm feeling really good and I'm kicking myself for not doing it sooner. So I think switching to matcha is probably my biggest self-care. And I try to read at least an hour a day too. I was on TikTok a lot last year and just like, screen time, dopamine dumping. And so I've really been trying to get back into reading and then switching off of coffee, which has been Unfortunately, life-changing because I really didn't want it to be the coffee, guys. I really wanted it to be something else.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, too much coffee, particularly with what you're going through, I can imagine was really spiking your cortisol. And how do you find it now with the matcha? Do you actually find that by having that each morning, you're not getting that sort of high and then low? Because obviously there's still caffeine in it, but not as much by any means as your coffee.
Yeah, it's so interesting because even though I was having the coffee after I had my 30 grams of protein breakfast, puffiness and swelling is something with my Hashimoto's that I'm just very sensitive to. I could feel it in my in my face and my body within an hour or two of consuming the coffee. And I actually had no idea that the autoimmune anti-inflammatory diet called to not have coffee. And so I didn't know it could be inflammatory. And yes, the matcha feels really good and it has L-theanine in it, which is a really powerful antioxidant. And matcha's also been shown, matcha and green tea in general have been shown to lower cortisol. Like they are effective at lowering cortisol if they're consumed daily. And so when I read that research, I was like, wow, I really need to give this a try. And it's nice because I didn't get that like caffeine because it still has caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
The switch over was not hard from like a being tired or having a headache perspective. It was more just like the ritual and the routine, but I do feel a lot better and I'm having my cortisol tested in 3 weeks. So I'll get the actual lowdown on if it worked and I'll have to update you all.
Yes, let us know for sure. I really hope it's helped you. But actually, the fact that you're just feeling better, your body knows, your intuition really knows when something is right for you or not. So I really feel that for you. And finally, I'd love you to share with our community one top tip just for feeling real inner peace and relaxation with our mind and body.
I think my biggest tip would be to start tracking your menstrual cycle because, like you were mentioning around day 20, that's when you really started to notice the pattern of, wow, I just feel so different. I think that knowledge is power, and I'm like very nerdy and into understanding. And I got a lot of peace when I started tracking my cycle and learned about the 4 phases and, kind of what each phase meant. So that would be my little homework is start tracking your cycle and just seeing if you notice patterns because beating yourself up every month is, gosh, it's so hard. And we all have done it and been there. And, so if you can let go of that and just kind of fall into line of peace with your cycle, oh, I'd be so happy for everyone who can do that.
I love that. And I completely agree with that. It's interesting because I've been in the health and yoga and wellness and beauty industry for nearly 20 years. And it wasn't until only a couple of years ago that I was tracking my cycle, that I actually even knew what day of my cycle I was on, which is crazy when I really prided myself on being so good my self-care. But it's so empowering, and also it allows you to just have awareness of what's going on, and awareness is the first step to change. So actually, if you do get to day 19, 20, or even day 23 or 24 and suddenly things are shifting and symptoms are coming up, you can go, okay, that's my hormones. Because often it's easy to mistake, for example, I always when it's day 20, I suddenly think, oh my gosh, everything's too much. Like I can't handle it. And actually all I need to remind myself is in 3 or 4 days time, I feel completely capable again, completely chilled about it all. And it's nice to just simply have that awareness because knowledge is power.
Exactly. So yeah, that's what I would hope for everybody.
Love that so much. And Kate, could you share with everyone where they can hear more about you, about your amazing business, and how they can follow you on social?
Yeah, so if you want to connect with me directly, carbs like a piece of bread and Kate is my Instagram. My business is Funk It Wellness, and you can find us on Instagram and TikTok. Unfortunately, we only ship inside the US because we're a small business. So if you're in the US listening, you can order our seed cycling kits there or on Amazon. And yeah, just reach out to me if you guys have any questions. It took me 6 years to learn about hormones. So don't feel like any question is a silly question. I'm here to help and hopefully provide as much guidance as I can.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you for having me.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like more information on face yoga or you'd like to become a face yoga teacher, just head to our website, faceyogaexpert.com, for more information. If you'd like to do a regular, structured daily face yoga program to get the best results, you can either use one of my apps, just search Danielle Collins on your app store, or you can use my book, just search Danielle Collins Face Yoga on Amazon. And thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.